The Joseon dynasty lasted for about 518 years across 27 kings. The first king, Taejo, moved the capital from Gyeongbokgung to Hanyang, which is the city that the Gyeongbokgung Palace is in today. When it comes to palace building, there are a few rules you have to follow. First is that you have to put the ancestor shrines for your ancestors on the left, while you put the shrines for your agriculture gods on the right. You also put the government buildings on the front of the palace with the king looking from the Gyeongbokgung's position, and you also put the marketplace in the back of the palace. However, in Gyeongbokgung's case, because there is a mountain, Bugak, to the back of the palace, they actually put the marketplace on the front of the palace. As I said, the Gyeongbokgung Palace was the main palace of the Joseon dynasty, and there are also other smaller palaces that supported the Gyeongbokgung's rule by housing the royal family and also serving as a king's residence during the time of disasters like fires and water hazards. That's enough about the background knowledge of the Gyeongbokgung Palace. Thank you. This is the Gwanghwamun Gate, and it has a sad history. Although it was built with the Gyeongbokgung Palace, it was destroyed in 1592 and was rebuilt in 1867 with Regent Hungsun rebuilding the whole palace. However, with Korea's annexation to Japan in 1910, the Japanese built the government general in the Gyeongbokgung Palace, and in that process they actually moved the Gwanghwamun Gate to the east. However, after the Korean War and Korea's liberation, the Gwanghwamun Gate was destroyed. So President Park Chung-hee moved the Gwanghwamun Gate back to this location. However, it was actually on the wrong axis, as it was facing the same axis as the government general, which was facing the Namsan mountain, which had the Japanese shrine on it. So after in 1995, when they demolished the government general government so you can no longer see it, they actually moved the Gwanghwamun Gate to the original axis it was on, par with the Gyeongbokgung Palace. And you can also see that there are 3 gates in the Gwanghwamun Gate, and in the center gate there's actually a painting on the ceiling of a legendary animal called the Jujak. The Jujak is one of the 4 cardinal gods that guard the direction south, and that is the reason why the Gwanghwamun Gate is facing the south. There's also a painting of a legendary animal called the Kirin on the right, and a painting of a legendary animal called the Hyunmu, the turtle, on the left. As you can see, there is a second floor to the Gwanghwamun Gate, and on the second floor is the drum and the bell. These 2 instruments were used to mark the time. The drum was beaten in the morning to wake everyone up, and the bell was beaten in the sunset to make everyone go to sleep. The reason they used 2 different instruments on these 2 times is because of the materials that are used to make up these 2 instruments. The drum was made up of wood and leather, which was believed to be related to the morning, according to the 5 elements theory, while the bell, which was made up of metal, was believed to be related to the sunset, also according to the 5 elements theory. They also rang the drum 33 times in the morning because they believed there were 33 realms on the heaven, and when they were beating the bell, they believed they were waking everyone up in the whole capital. So they even rang the bell for all the 33 realms on the heavens, and they beat the bell 28 times in the sunset, as there were 28 major star constellations in the night sky, and they were putting everyone to sleep at the night. So that's the reason why they rang the bell 28 times in the night. This is a statue of a legendary animal called the Haechi. The Haechi was believed to be able to differentiate from the right and wrong, and was placed in front of palace buildings to guard against evil spirits and disasters like fires. If you look closely, you can see that the Haechi's body is covered with fishy scales, and you can also see that it has a bell below its neck. And although it's not very visible, it actually has a horn on its head, and it also has feathers inside its armpits. These Haechi statues were placed not just in the Gyeongbokgung Palace, but also in other palaces as well. And it was also a symbol of law and order. So it was also placed in front of the Sahanbu department, which was the anti-corruption department. It also served as a marking spot for officials to climb down from their horses before entering the palace. This is the Gyeongbokgung Bridge, and the Gyeongbokgung Bridge was important because it separated the king's realm from the common people's realm. So when an official was crossing this bridge, he would be entering the king's territory, so he would have to be ready to meet the king. And since this Gyeongbokgung Bridge was built on the Gyeomcheon, which is a stream, and water is a purifying force, it also meant the official could cleanse his mind of evil and bad thoughts before meeting the king. If you look at the stream now, you can see that there's not much water. However, originally there should be about enough water to come up to your ankle. And there are also these 4 animal statues around the bridge that guard the palace from evil entities that try to swarm the palace from the water. People believe that evil and bad spirits might actually infiltrate the palace through these waters. So they actually placed these chalok to guard the palace from these entities. This is the Gyeongbokgung courtyard, and the name Gyeongbokgung means to work hard on politics. So the Gyeongbokgung Hall was the main hall. And here was held the morning assembly according to the Sejongshillok on each month on the 5th, 11th, 21st, and 25th day of each month. The morning assembly is the time for the officials to greet the kings. There are 2 types of morning assembly, official and unofficial. The official greeting held in a royal court as large as the Gyeongbokgung was called Chocham. Chocham was held regularly at Gyeongbokgung on the 5th, 11th, 21st, and 25th of every month, and all the officials in Seoul had to attend it. When the king sat on his throne, the officials bowed 4 times, Chocham. The greeting ceremony ended after the officials finished bowing. On a day when Jochang wasn't opened, meetings on unofficial affairs called Sangchang were held. High-ranking officials met the king every day at Pyeonjeon, the king's office, even when there was no morning assembly. This is the Sajongjeon, and the name Sajong means to think once more before doing politics. So you can see how much Koreans valued the king's decision-making. On days without the Johae, called the morning assembly, the king would have more simple morning assemblies called the Sangcham right here in front in the Pyeonjeon. And even days without these morning assemblies, the high-ranking officials would meet here at the Pyeonjeon. Sangcham was usually held around 4 or 5 a.m. When King Sejong was in power, he never forgot to conduct the morning assembly every day at 3 a.m. One day, official Uijong Liu Guan asked King Sejong, "Is it difficult to hold your morning assembly every morning? So how about we do it every other day?" King Sejong replied, "You are probably tired because you're getting so old, so send someone else if you're tired." The working time of the officials changed as a result of the king's work style. For example, it was normal for the officials to work late into the night because King Yeongjo never stopped working on a problem until it got fixed. In King Gojong's case, the officials went home at dawn because the king would start the work late at night. When the sun rose, the king and the officials attended academic and political debates called Gyeongyeon. It was normal for the king to study before breakfast. During Gyeongyeon, the king and the officials studied the classics, history, and Neo-Confucianism, then discussed national affairs together. This is the Gangneonjeon, which is the bedroom of the king. You can see that it's different from other palace buildings as it does not have the white support beam called the Yongmaru. Yongmaru in Korean means dragon support beam. And since the dragon was a symbol of the king, when the king was inside the Gangneonjeon, there will be 2 dragons under one sky, which doesn't make sense. So they removed the Yongmaru so that because they were worried that it might bring about bad omens and bad luck for the king. The Gangneonjeon is also situated on a stone foundation called the Worde, which will be used for little parties or banquets in the Gangneonjeon. And if you look inside, you can see that there are doors hanging from the support beams. And these doors could be also flung down, so during the winter times when it was very cold, they actually closed all those hanging doors so they would conserve the heat inside the building. And in summer times, like right now, they would hang them open so that wind can go through the building and cool the whole building. And about the inner structure of the Gangneonjeon, the king's room was in the center, while the other smaller rooms were used by the maids, which surrounded the king's quarters. This was so that maids could be besides the king whenever the king had an emergency or got an illness, so they could help the king. Now I will tell you about the king's morning and the rest of his schedule. The king started the day with the ringing of the bell, which announced the opening of the city. At 4 in the morning, the bell was rung 33 times. The king had to wake up when the bell rang to be an example for his subjects. To announce his awakened state, he would cough loudly, and he neatly put on his royal robe, Gyeongbokgung, and the headwear, Ikseongwan, and the rest of his uniform. When the bell rang, the king would wake up to greet the royal elders. If he was busy, he would send a eunuch to greet them. It was normal for the kings and the officials to work together in national affairs. Therefore, the start of the day began with the formal greeting. This event between the king and the officials is formally known as the Chohae. We will talk about the 2 chimneys in the Gyeongbokgung Hall. And all palace buildings at the time used the Korean traditional heating system, Ondo, to power the heating systems. And they actually use only charcoal for fuel. And when you use charcoal for fuel, it creates some smudge and soot on the chimneys. And that's the reason why they separated these 2 chimneys from the actual building, as the king's bedroom should always be clean. And if you look at the chimney itself, you can see that it has some Chinese characters as patterns. This one says Mansu Bugang, while the one on the east side says Chunse Manse. These 2 Chinese characters, patterns, were written so that in hopes of the king's health and longevity. And there are also patterns surrounding the Chinese characters, which is called the Bushi Buzhong, which means there's no start and no end. And these patterns were built so that in hopes of the endless prosperity of the Joseon dynasty. This is the queen's living quarters called the Gyeotdaejeon. Similar to the king's living quarters called the Gangneungjeon, it does not have a dragon support beam, as they thought it would also bring bad luck and bad omen to the queen and the queen's baby. The queen had a lot of responsibilities. She had to take care of royal events and the royal family, and she was also in charge of the women in the palace, which included the maids, the wives of high-ranking officials, and the king's concubines. That is why the Gyeotdaejeon is beautifully decorated, because of the queen's many responsibilities. The Gyeotdaejeon's floating screens include 10 longevity symbols like the pine tree, which symbolize youth and longevity because it's always green. Another symbol in the floating screens are the long-living animal, which is turtle, which lives about 100 to 150 years, and also the crane, which lives longer than other birds. According to the legends, it's said that a 1,000-year-old crane turns its feathers blue, while a 2,000-year-old crane turns its feathers black. Other symbols like clouds, running water, rocks are also symbols of longevity. There is a beautiful decorated wall behind the Gyeotdaejeon, and the Chinese characters that decorate these walls are also meaningful. The Chinese character Bok means luck, while Su means longevity. Now that we look at the Gyeotdaejeon, we will look at the Amisan Mountain. The name Ami comes from a Chinese mountain, and this is basically a very traditional Korean garden that is made out of steps, and in each step there are plants and beautiful patterns. And there's also two multiple chimneys in the back that are connected with the traditional Korean heating system, Ondo. And these chimneys were separated from the main building so they don't smudge the building with charcoal. And there is also 2 pedestals, and the one on the east is called the Nakwadam, which means sunset pond, and the one on the west is called Hamolchi, which means the pond with the moon. So these 2 pedestals with the other patterns of nature together symbolize the whole ecosystem. So the queen could be entertained by looking at this small mound with all these natural environments, because she couldn't leave the palace very often. On this side, we have the Gyeongbokgung, which was a building used when the queen was giving birth to a baby. So it's a very special building, only used in very special times. This is the Gyeongjeon, and the name Gyeong comes from a story about King Jeongjo. King Jeongjo was very respectful and dutiful to his parents, and he even built a building called the Gyeongdang. And ever since then, the name Gyeong has been a symbol of filial duties. This building, Gyeongjeon, was built by King Gojong for his adopted mother, Queen Jo. Queen Jo was the wife of King Cheojong, and King Cheojong did not have a successor to become the next king. So they actually found a faraway blood relative, King Gojong, and adopted him as crown prince. And after King Gojong became the king, he thanked Queen Jo for adopting him by building this building. And you can see how much respect and how thankful he was for Queen Jo, as there are beautiful patterns of the 10 longevity symbols and the lucky bat on the walls of the Gyeongjeon. This is the Gyeongjeon chimney, and this chimney was used to vent all the smoke from the ondor right there. And you can see there are beautiful patterns of the 10 longevity symbols, and also there are the patterns of bats on each side. Bats were always a symbol of luck, as the pronunciation in Korean, bok, is similar to the pronunciation of the word luck. And they were also active at night, so they're seen as hardworking, and they took care of pests like mosquitoes and other little bugs. So they've been recognized as a symbol of luck. There's also cranes, and cranes were always a symbol of long life, and they can also be seen in other paintings like the Ilor Obongdo. Below the 10 longevity symbols are the burgasari, and the burgasari is an amalgamation of different parts of animals. It had the body and head of a bear, and it also had a trunk of an elephant. It also had the claws of a tiger, and it had eyes of a cow. The pattern in the center is that of a goblin. And we'll more talk about the 10 longevity symbols. The 10 longevity symbols include the deer, the crane, the turtle, the elixir plant, the pine tree, and the bamboo tree, along with the natural environment such as the rocks, the clouds, the sun, and the flowing water. And these 10 symbols were believed to bring long life to whoever had these symbols in their houses. So that's why they built the symbol in the Gyeongjeon. This is the Gyeongbokgung Sojubang, and the Sojubang was the cooking quarters of the Gyeongbokgung Palace. It's divided into 3 parts, and one was to make actual meals for the king. The other was to make desserts like candy for the king, and the last was to prepare food for royal banquets and festivals. There are several types of dishes included in one set of dishes for a table called bansang, which includes barli, a rice ball, tangi, a soup bowl, and varying types of jangchup, small side dishes. The number of jangchup could vary between 3, 7, 9, and 12. And during the Joseon dynasty, common people usually had 3 or 5 side dishes, while the noblemen had around 7, and the prince had 9, and the king had the most dishes with 12 side dishes. And if you were trying to prepare a pansang, there will usually be common staples will be grilled fish, seasoned bean sprouts, spinach with rice soup and stew, and also Chinese cabbage, kimchi, cucumber kimchi, and salted fish eggs. Also, kimchi, soup, and the soybean paste were not included in the side dishes, as they were eaten, common staples that were eaten every day. Other foods were considered side dishes include Korean foods were also divided into rice and side dishes, and Koreans did not feel like they were having a meal if they did not eat rice. And in the old days, if people thought that if they didn't eat rice, they did not eat a meal. And the reason behind this is because of the nutrients in the rice. Koreans usually ate twice as much rice than the other East Asian countries, and the Korean climate was not very good for breeding livestock because it was mountain and rugged. So Korean ate rice to gain protein, because rice has more protein than other types of grain like corn and wheat. Rice and beans were often mixed together for protein, and by doing so, essential amino acids, which are proteins, were compensated for Koreans. Koreans also used beans to make food such as soybean paste soup. As for the side dishes, they used vegetables that are commonly found in mountain and rugged terrain. And because grain and vegetable have a lot of cellulose, it was chewed for a long time, and this caused the frontal lobe and to improve digestion. And this is also the reason why Koreans have a bigger small intestine than other ethnicities, because they eat more grain and vegetables. The king's breakfast meals was called a surasang, and it was usually had 12 side dishes excluding the rice, kimchi, stew, and soup. However, not all kings had 12 side dishes. Famous King Yeongjo actually only had 3 meals a day, while King Jeongjo limited the number of side dishes to 7. When these kings were eating the surasang, they were always accompanied by the queen, and the king and queen would each have their own tables to eat from. And also, the king was sitting always in the east because the king symbolized the rising sun, while the queen was seated in the west because that's where sunset ended. And when these two people were eating their meals, there was always 3 maids who accompanied them. And these maids would test the food if it was poisonous or not before the king and queen ate, and so that they could actually test if the food was poisonous or not. And these 3 maids were only people who had known the king and queen for a long time, so they're trustable. And the eating utensils that the king and queen used were also made out of silver. Since silver changes color when it touches poison, it could also test for poisonous food. This building is called the Gyeongbokgung, and the name Jibok means to collect things that are as valuable as jade. Jade was a very important jewel in East Asia, as it was even used as the Chinese emperor's seal. So you can see how much the king who built this, King Gyeongbokgung, valued his books, as the Gyeongbokgung was used as his personal library. If you look at the Gyeongbokgung building itself, you can see the main building is built with bricks, and it also uses glass. This shows that the building incorporated not only Korean architecture, but also Western and Chinese architecture. Furthermore, the Gyeongbokgung was not only used as a personal library of Gyeongbokgung, but it was also used as a reception center for foreign envoys. It is said that King Gyeongbokgung met envoys from Austria, England, Japan, all in the same year in this building. If you look at the pavilion called the Parojong to the left, you can see it's actually octagonal pavilion instead of a hexagonal pavilion like the Hangwonjeong. This shows the heightened king's authority compared to old times, and this makes sense as King Gyeongbokgung wanted to show his authority as he just became the ruler of the Joseon dynasty. The Gyeongbokgung was built according to the King Gyeongbokgung's orders in 1873. It was built using King Gyeongbokgung's private property from the royal safe called the Daetanggo. The officials at the time were opposed to the construction of the Gyeongbokgung, and that's the reason why the king used the royal family safe instead of the country's finance. After its construction in 1873, it was used by not only King Gyeongbokgung but Queen Min until 1895. We'll talk more about the Gyeongbokgung as we head inside of it. Now that we're inside of the Gyeongbokgung quarters, we will talk about the sad history of this place. In 1895, a group of Japanese soldiers attacked the Gyeongbokgung Palace through the Gwangun Gate and the Shinmunmun Gate. Then the Joseon guards fought back, but the Japanese soldiers caught the king and crown prince hostage, and they came to this Gyeongbokgung quarters, which was where Queen Min was living at the time. And they actually assassinated Queen Min in the Okoru, and they also killed the other maids who were trying to protect her because they were worried that one of the maids might be disguising as Queen Min. After that, they actually burned her body and they put the ashes in the Hangwonjeong pond, and the Japanese soldiers who were in the act were tried in a Japanese court, but most of them were proven non-guilty. After Queen Min's assassination in the Okoru, there was actually a the Russian architect Sabatin, who actually saw what happened and Queen Min's assassination by the Japanese. However, Miura, who was the Japanese representative and envoy in Korea, claimed that the Queen Min's death was due to the conflict between the Japanese soldiers and the Korean guards. So, however, the Russian architect Sabatin proved that this was wrong, and it was the Japanese soldiers who actually killed Queen Min. However, in the following trials in the Japanese courts of these Japanese soldiers, they were proven actually not guilty and were not punished. Anyways, the building you're watching at this is called the Changandang, and this was King Gojong's quarters. After King Gojong started to rule the country himself, not without the Reagan Hungsun, his father, he wanted to show people his political independence. And that's why he moved to this building outside of his father, King Reagan Hungsun's influence. This is the Gyeongbokgung Pavilion, and the name Gyeongwon means that the fragrance of the flowers spreads very far. It's a hexagonal pavilion, and it was used as a resting spot for the king and the royal family. As you can see from the pond that the pavilion is on a circular island, which is surrounded by a square pond. This shows the universe of the people at the time, as people thought that the circular island symbolizes the sky and the king who rules the country, while the square pond surrounding the circular island symbolizes the ground and also the people surrounding the king who are in need of the king's guidance. So you can see the symbolism of the Joseon dynasty in this pond. The Gyeongbokgung Pavilion was also the first spot where electricity was used in Asia in 1887, which is only 8 years after Edison invented electricity. So they installed lamps in the Gyeongbokgung, and they actually installed a generator in the pond to power these lamps. And it's said that due to some technological failures of the technology at the time, the heat generated from the generator actually killed a lot of fishes, and also the lamps in the Gyeongbokgung were not very reliable. You can see that it says this is the first spot that used electricity in Korea, as it says in this stone. And that way you can also see the stream that comes from Mount Bogak to fill this pond. Back to the actual pavilion itself, you can see that it's very far, but you can see that there are signs on each side of the 6 sides, and one of them reads, dancing dragon soars from the pond to the sky from the demigod's pond. And these signs were placed in such pavilions as per the King Gojong's wishes. This is the Gyeonghaeru Pavilion, and the name Gyeonghwae means for the officials and the king to meet through virtue. If you look at the Gyeonghaeru Pavilion, the Gyeonghaeru Pavilion itself was used for royal banquets and reception of foreign envoys. So it was more of an official party place rather than a resting spot. If you look at the actual building, you can see that there are japsang on the roof, and there are a total of 11 sculptures. These sculptures were called the japsang, and they're all based off characters from the famous Chinese novel, The Journey to the West. On the westernmost side is the Buddhist monk Samjang and the other characters. And these japsang were believed to vanquish evil spirits and protect the building. If you look at the columns that support the Gyeonghaeru Pavilion, you can see that the surrounding outer columns are squares, while the inner 24 columns, are actually circles. This shows the universe that the Koreans believed that they were in at the time, because the inner columns symbolize the sky and further the king ruling the country, while the surrounding square columns symbolize the ground and the common people being ruled by the king. Also, the Gyeonghaeru Pavilion used to be completely surrounded by these walls, but nowadays only half of these walls have been reconstructed so that tourists can actually look inside the Gyeonghaeru Pavilion. There is actually an official called Gujongjik who wanted to see the Gyeonghaeru Pavilion, which is walled off, so bad that he crept into the Gyeonghaeru Pavilion one night and was confronted by King Sejong himself. And King Sejong ordered Gyeongbokgung to memorize a whole book of Cheonchu. And it's said that he was able to utter every sentence perfectly, so he was not punished for his actions. You can see that there are 3 doors leading to the Gyeongheru. These doors are symbolized by each natural objects. The highest gate is symbolized by the sun, while the second gate is symbolized by the moon. And the third gate and the last gate is symbolized by the stars. These gates were used by different kinds of people. Because the highest gate was closest to the Gangneungjeon, it was used only by the king. The second door was used by high-ranking officials and the royal family, while the third gate was used by just normal officials. And they would use these doors to go into the Gyeongheru in times of royal banquets for officials and also receptions of foreign envoys from China. I'll tell you more about the 5 elements theory. The changes of everything in the cosmos are the result of the interaction of yin and yang, which is yin energy and basically yang energy. Yin and yang are the concept of a duality forming a whole. We encounter examples of yin and yang every day. For example, night is yin while day is yang, and also female is yin while male is yang. Over thousands of years, quite a bit has been sorted and grouped under various yin and yang classification systems. Neither yin nor yang is absolute. Nothing is completely yin or completely yang. Each aspect contains the beginning point of the other aspect. For example, day becomes night, then night becomes day. The 5 elements theory refers to 5 basic elements: wood, fire, earth, metal, and water, which make up the universe. This theory can be used to describe the movement and the relationship between different elements and phenomena in the nature. In the 5 elements theory, time, seasons, directions, animals, plants, smells, as well as internal organs can be categorized under one of these 5 elements. The theory of the 5 elements thinks that the world is composed of these 5 elements and changes according to the fixed laws of nature. It not only affects the human's destiny, but also affects the universe and its creator's cycle constantly. The theory is a very important part of traditional culture and mostly used in philosophy, traditional medicine, as well as fortune-telling. When foreigners visit the Gyeongbokgung Palace, they're always interested in the color decorations of the palace buildings. These color decorations are called the tancheong, and the tancheong are made up of 5 colors. First is red, which symbolizes fire. Second is blue, which symbolizes tree and plant life. Third is yellow, which symbolizes the soil and the earth we're standing on. Fourth is the black, which symbolizes the water. And the last is white, which symbolizes metal. And these 5 elements are what our ancestors believed created the universe, including the sun and the moon. And these 7 elements are what makes up the Korean weekday from Monday to Sunday. And also, the tancheong was not only used for decorative reasons, but also for practical reasons. Since all palace buildings were made out of wood, the palace buildings were vulnerable to humidity, which could make them rot. To prevent this, our ancestors painted the palace buildings with the tancheong to prevent bugs from eating the wood or the wood splitting into half due to too much humidity or too less humidity. These tancheong were not only used in palaces, but also authoritarian buildings like shrines or Buddhist temples. So they represented someone's authority, especially the king. If you look at the walls of the building, you can see that on the wooden support beam here are little pointy rods that were placed to prevent birds from actually nesting on these wooden support beams. When birds actually nest on these wooden support beams, they could cause damage to the whole palace building, as they could not only nest, but they could also poop on the paints, which would make the wood rot. And also there are these crisscross holes that were installed for ventilation of air. And since all these palace buildings were made out of wood, they were prone to rotting in humid conditions. So to prevent humid conditions, they installed these holes for wind to go in and go out and to control humidity of these wooden structures.